Namaste. I've been asked to speak on psychological well being from the yogic perspective. Why do we need a yogic perspective? One reason is because we don't really know what man is from all the paradigms that are right now available with us. One of my biggest shocks, if I may say, when I joined the psychiatry department of the medical school was that I was looking for a concept of what normalcy is according to the current paradigms, and there was none. So I had, of course, read the Gita, and I understood normalcy from that point of view. The concept that time was of sthit pragya. Of course, I had started reading Sri Aurobindo, had my own experiences about it. But normalcy as it is today is very often, unfortunately, defined by the absence of abnormality, and abnormality is defined by the absence of normalcy. What it means is that it's a statistical understanding. It's true even of physical illnesses, and there's a great fallacy in doing so, but leaving that apart, coming straight to the psychological issues. So, the concept of normalcy as it stands today is that one, individually, if there is a consistency of behavior in a certain way, we call it normal. For instance, an individual is, by nature a little anger prone, he is a bit greedy, then since beginning he has shown that behavior. So at 60, 65, somebody says, something is wrong with him. No, he has been like that. So one is that individual normal. A person is consistent with his, shall I say, abnormality, it's regarded as normal. The second aspect is from the larger perspective of commonality of human beings. So that's the other way that normalcy is defined. An average human being is regarded as having certain kinds of behaviors which is socially acceptable, humanly we regard it as reasonable, and we call it normal. If a person deviates from that, then it is regarded as abnormal. Let's take an example, two examples which come from history. One is, of course, individual normalcy and abnormalcy. For Arjuna to lay down arms before an army was not really normal, given his prowess and given what Arjuna stood for and his capacities. It was a bit unusual for him. At the same time, if you look at collectively, then at that point of time, or at any point, we read about the gladiators, we read about the way people lived, the way people, fought wars, and the way they meted out justice. So it was regarded as normal. I mean, today's times have changed, and somebody who says, I'm going to take the law in my hands, he'll be regarded as abnormal. So, normalcy is something which we have not yet discovered. And therefore, a yogic perspective is necessary because the yogic perspective brings in a completely new dimension to what man is. So, when we look at the term used for man in Indian thought, it is the same term which is used to define the divine being, Purusha. So, it's the same term is used, indicating at one level that man has been made in the image of the one Lord, and also indicating his possibility that of all the creatures, man is one part of that creation who can consciously become one with his creator. So these are the two basic premises of yoga. Primarily, what it means is that man has not yet arrived at his normalcy, what is he's capable of. So if we take that man is what he is today and he will forever remain like that, then this is one way that one can deal with it. The second is that there are possibilities within man. And unless he arrives at the fullness of these possibilities, we can't really call him normal in the truest sense of the word. So, Sri Aurobindo has this famous, one of those one-liners where he says, man is an abnormal seeking his own normalcy. What it means is that if you really look at society, there are certain kinds of things which are regarded as normal. Unfortunately, we go by still, whatever we may speak about inner being and motives and intents, we still see the outer behavior. And that's one of the biggest strongholds of falsehood. So anybody can, speak nicely, can dress up nicely, can be carrying a card which contains the degrees, and it's so easy to get fooled, simply because we are looking at the external behavior. The person is very neat, well behaved, but the same person, it's like Jekyll and Hyde. When these social, there are no such social barriers or regulations, can behave worse than anyone else. This is what is typified in one of the stories in the Upanishads, where all the creatures go to Lord Brahma and tell him that why is man regarded as the highest? We have a problem there. So Brahmaji asked why. He says his behavior, everything that we see in him is worse than any of us. So dog said, he is worse than me in faithfulness. The snake says he is so much deceitful that I at least show my fangs and people are afraid of me. But this fellow shows very nice smile on the face, but is carrying poison fangs inside, and so on and so forth. Lion says that, he kills by deceit. Otherwise, there is no way that he can take a challenge from me. And it goes on, all the list of complaints, and Brahmaji hears all of them patiently. He is not in a hurry to, settle the files. And after hearing all the witnesses, he says, I understand your problem. But you see, man is still regarded as the highest because he carries within him something which none of you have. So what is that something which man has? So he has got within him the discerning intelligence through which he can go higher and higher. The possibility that he can self-reflect, change, evolve is there in man. So then the animals don't know what it is, so they cut a sorry figure. Then they say, but he doesn't seem to use it. So then Lord Brahma says that, well, if he doesn't use it, he is worse than you, all of you. And if he uses it, then he is higher than even himself. So this is the predicament of man, very beautifully described in Savitri at one place, that a cross between the demigod and the beast. So this is how man is. On one side, our one leg is in animality, we are evolving out of it, and there is a huge chunk which is as unconscious as an animal driven by pure instincts, and but to that is added this mind which can fabricate things, it can twist things, it can put up a facade. So that makes it one of the most dangerous in terms of the animality aspect of man. But there is the other aspect which is also revealed to us in the Upanishads, that all the gods dwell within the human body. Because the form of human body or the human being's form is such that it has the capacity of releasing gods on a material basis. So that's something fantastic. Now, depending on which way we look at it, depending on what is trending within a human being, what current he is flowing with, he can become worse than an animal and he can become greater than a god. This is the big challenge of a human being. And that's where yoga steps in. What does yoga do? It is a process through which we can accelerate this evolution which is still due to man. In Savitri, there is a very beautiful passage where Sri Aurobindo says, man still a child in nature's mighty hands, in the succession of the moment lives. So we think too much about ourselves, but the fact is that to a changing present is his narrow right. The future flees before him as he moves. He looks at imagined garments, not a face. His memory stares back at a phantom past. He knows not. He waits to weigh the certitude of his thoughts. He waits to see the consequence of his acts. Yet he knows not whether he shall survive or perish like the mastodon and the sloth from this earth where he was king. So this is our predicament. And this is because there is within us a tremendous evolutionary impetus, and yoga takes that out and helps us evolve beyond man. This is the whole purpose of yoga. Now, not going into the details of that. Now, so from the yogic perspective, man's evolution is not yet complete. So what are the issues which really stalk us, even though outer behavior may be normal? It's not about having a breakdown. As I said, many people, if they are not labeled as sick, they are regarded as normal. But I often used to say this half jokingly in my department in psychiatry, that there are people who are not sick but they make others sick. So they are themselves not labeled as abnormal, but they have been the cause of making many people abnormal. So which one is better? Well, that's a different story altogether. So the reason is there are three particular problem. There are many problems inside us. We are busy seeing the problems outside, trying to sort them out. When we sit for discussions, we are busy about what's happening in Afghanistan and what's Iran's policy, and America, India, and everywhere else. But as Bulle Shah put it so beautifully, uh, you fought with this, you fought with that. Apni nafas to ladiya nahi. So, with your own ego, you have never battled. That's why you cannot understand the world and cannot do a jot about it in the real sense unless you have conquered your own ego. So, the first problem of man is that his center is in a place which is no center. When we look at the ego, it's ego as a principle. It's people often say, does the soul exist? Does it have a form? Well, the soul has a form and it exists. Those who have seen the soul can say. But the ego doesn't have a form. It's like a non-existent reality. So what does it do? It's like a cap which suddenly takes hold of one part of the being, and I think this is myself. So in the morning, when a person gets up and says, Lord, you are great, well, this is one part. But in the evening, the same person is accusing and God for his misdeeds, which man has to suffer. So within us, the ego is like a chameleon which is changing colors all the time, because it's a kind of manager who doesn't know how to manage the house. It doesn't even understand the house, let alone manage. So it's a deputy manager, and it tries to handle things. Its tool is reason, which again is equally ignorant, because reason depends on the data of the senses. So this is the big challenge of man, that we live by the ego self, and the ego self really cannot handle our life. Really, really, really it cannot. We have this illusion that it can. So what really is the ego self? Ego self is when we identify ourselves with the mind, body, heart, and all this nature. When we identify ourselves with this or that aspect of nature, that is called as the ego self. This ego self then extends family identification, identification of the house I live in, identification with my outer court. There's that famous joke of, real story of, G.B. Shaw, when he was invited to a party, and the princess told him that, it was I think it was a duchess, and she told him, ki, look, sir, please dress up properly, that's the only requirement. And he dressed up very properly, and he started eating the ice cream, and as if clumsily started putting it on his coat. And then, people started laughing, and he said, you see, my coat is more important than me, so I'm just proving the point. He was a witty person. So, but this is still worse. Identifying with mind, life, body is a mechanism that nature has given us, so that till we discover the true Malik, true owner of the house, it's kind of a makeshift arrangement till the owner comes. But as an extension, we start extending it as if the whole world is my empire. So ego, what does it do? It automatically, it universalizes itself, looks at itself at the center of this creation, and expects that everything in this world, from God to the person who is with me, the animal life, this nature, elements, everything should move with me at the center. So when something happens in life which he is not, it hurts the ego, or it's not according to my, expectation, a simple thing like I want to go out and enjoy the sunny weather, and if it rains, so the ego self is hurt just because, oh, why there is this rain here. We don't even realize that this rain is so helpful to a lot of people. Probably the farmers will be rejoicing it. But the ego self feels very unhappy. So the problem of ego self is it is a false vision of reality. Even when it speaks of God, it believes in a God who is all the time a benevolent, merciful God, and an omnipotent God who is there at his service. Even God is a slave. Whatever I ask, he must do it. But he is not wise enough to decide for us. So this is the problem with the ego self, that it's perpetually seeking its own gratification for its own sake. And it wants to then extend this into everyone. So typical way of ego leading a life, social life, is that it wants every group, it goes into those groups which are what is called as like-minded people. Everybody should think alike, everybody should have the same custom, tradition, and therefore this tendency tends to ultimately, we know that ideological wars, even fanaticism, all this is the result of this tendency taking a very abnormal degree. Even in ordinary human life, it is there as a tendency within the house when a person wants everybody to think the same way or dress in a particular way. So, this is the way that ego is trying to assert itself. It takes an extreme form with certain groups. So, this is the number one problem of man. And we'll talk about the solution, but first to understand the problem. Second is that there is a great degree of restlessness. We are so used to it, we don't even regard that it is a restlessness. That's why when people are asked to sit down and just be quiet and forget about meditation. Mother said so beautifully, there's so many moments in life when we can just look at just the setting sun, look at just an image outside or within, and it's like a door opening inwards or door opening upwards. We can widen our consciousness, reflect upon life, raise some questions. Why am I here? What am I doing? Where am I going? Where do I really come from? But there is, as the great poet said, hardly we have time to stand and stare. And someone very beautifully said, every day we should raise this question: where do I come from? Where am I going? And who am I? And we will see that as we progress, these questions change. But we have no time because, well, we are very busy people, and when we have no work to do, then there is always the internet, there is WhatsApp. So we are very busy people because, we must reply to every blue tick on the WhatsApp. Not only reply, we must see whether a blue tick is there or not. And every mail, so the result is that there is extreme degree of restlessness within us, as if we are seeking something we don't know what it is. But the real cause of this restlessness is, one, the desired self, which is all the time wanting something. It's never happy. It's wanting something. It doesn't even know what it's wanting. And if you look at the arrangement of creation, then we understand the deeper cause. As we go higher and higher, it's exactly like Earth. As we go higher and higher, we can climb to a zone where air flows very peacefully and smoothly. So that's the principle behind flights taking off to 35, 40,000 feet, because the air is very rare. It supports the flight. You can go very fast. The friction thing is very less. But as we start coming down, there are these winds which clash with each other. There are storms. As we come still lower, the whole thing is very turbulent. So within us also, within the same thing applies inwardly, that as we climb higher and higher in terms of consciousness, we see that the whole atmosphere is much, much vaster and calmer. Sri Aurobindo describes the higher mind as a steady sunlight. And if we go still further, we enter into zones which are by their nature calm and quiet. And as we take a dip down and down, you see what happens when we are angry, when we are driven by desire, lust, fears. See how restless we become. This is a kind of a vicious cycle. For instance, we had recently the pandemic. I don't know whether it's still going on or we ever had it. These two things are as confusing. But the point is that there is so much fear. And this fear generates so much restlessness. Now, when a person is restless, it's not only about his mind being restless. All the body mechanisms are going haywire. Why? Because the mind is not able to give a correct signal even for healing. It's confused. Oh, the doctor should see me. Did I get the medicine? Is this medicine right? Is the ventilator there? The figures. So what is happening is, normally the mind would give the right switches. The will, the faith, they will all be activated in the right way. And as Sri Aurobindo advised long back when there was epidemic of influenza, that just stay quiet, stay inward, call for the higher force. It is unable to do that because it's in a zone of constant restlessness. So when we live by the desired self, then of course its extreme forms are lust, possessiveness, dominating, all these are, but the root is in desire. So what is the problem with desire? Isn't it normal to people? Yes, it is normal, but in the sense of the average normalcy, the problem of desire, the reason why it came was to shake off the tamas in nature, inertia in nature. But at the same time, its side effect is that the desire doesn't even know what it really wants, because it wants the object for its own sake. And it believes erroneously, because it's under a cover of ignorance, that if I have this object, I'll be a happy person. Often I, give this story and it's so apt. So there was a person who walked into a, facility where they were psychologically people who were depressed, and one person was constantly calling out, Lulu, Lulu, oh my Lulu. And the person asked, what's wrong? Who was visiting with the psychiatrist, what's wrong with this man? Well, he loved Lulu so much. Oh, I understand. But he couldn't marry, he didn't marry her. Oh, I understand. Yes, it happens. When you love somebody and don't marry, it's very painful. And as he goes further, there is another person, few beds down the line, and he's also saying Lulu, Lulu, Lulu. So what's wrong with him? Did he also love Lulu and didn't get married? Said no, his problem is slightly different. He got married to Lulu and is unhappy. So, oh, is it? Acha. Then he takes a chuckle and says, yes, it happens. Few beds down the line, there's a third person who is saying, Lulu, Lulu, Lulu. He says, what's wrong with this person? He says, no, he doesn't even know who Lulu is. So why is he crying taking a name? He is looking at these two people who are crying in the name of Lulu. And he believes that Lulu is somebody very desirable. Now, isn't it something which we start from the childhood, educating a child that this is desirable? Who decided that? So often when parents try to counsel, tell their children all kinds of things, and sometimes they come to me कि बच्चे को समझाइए. So I ask them that आप समझ गए हैं? Have you understood? Now let me do my job. Don't कि बच्चे को समझाइए. Maybe most of the time parents need to be counseled, because they are the ones who have put into the child's head these kind of conditionings. A child is naturally very happy. It's we who have started putting one bar and another bar and third bar between him and his happiness. By the time he grows up, the child believes that only if I get these many number of Lulu, I'll be happy. But it's not true at all, because happiness is not in Lulu. Happiness is within us. And if we are happy, then it doesn't matter whether it's X, Y, Z, we'll still be able to not only discover happiness within us, but grant happiness to the mythical Lulu of our dreams. So this problem of desire is it's ignorantly seeking. It believes that this object is going to give me happiness. And I often give this example. Objects giving happiness is like when you take a bite of your most favorite dish. How long does the happiness last? Either till you take the next sip of water or till you take the next bite. So this is what happiness is about. Recently there was a very interesting experiment which relates to this desired self, where there was this candy. Some of us may have heard about it, and there was this candy, marshmallow, as it is called there. So, but well, for us, candy is a more general term which children are very fond of, and children were asked to sit there, and they were told, if you don't eat the candy, you will get the second one. If you eat the candy, well, that's it. So the teachers, the person who was conducting the experiment went out. Just after a few minutes, 5 minutes, they came in. So most children had eaten up the candies. They couldn't resist. Some debated this, that, and then they finally ate up. And then very few children, just 3 or 4, they waited for the second candy. Now the experiment didn't end here. Now they started studying long term, 10 years down the line. And they were in for a very strange discovery. All who had eaten the candy in the first go turned out to be in real life as having number of issues, problems, almost like a failure, because they were restlessly jumping from one thing to the another, wanting to have things immediately. Whereas those who had waited, they were much more emotionally stable. Their life was a lot more, in terms of their inner nature, was a lot more happy, simply because they had learned how to wait with patience. So this is a basic training. But what desire does, at its extreme, it makes us very impatient. It wants us not only to have the object, but have it now, instantly. So this, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have this whole society is built around, consumerism, instant gratification. It's not a healthy thing. We are leading people just contrary to what the yogic vision tells us. So desired self is the second problem. And the third problem, which is really a major issue, because desire and the ego self has been identified by many. All the mystics identify it, right? Buddha and earlier the Vedic rishis, and right down to our line. But this is a problem which hardly anybody has identified. And Sri Aurobindo lays his finger right there. It's that within us we carry our own contradictions. Of course, Walt Whitman was right when he said, well, I'm not consistent. I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. Now there are within us many, many different types of gentlemen. Our heart does not obey our head, and our head completely suppresses the heart. It doesn't listen to it. Our reason and faith, they are at contradiction with each other. We desire something which our deeper will does not approve. There's a contradiction between our aspiration and our desire. So all the time within us, there is a kind of inner battle going on. And very often what we do is we let one part dominate and suppress the others. But the problem with that is that the entire energy which is there in that part is not released. And it makes us maimed, incapable, and we don't even realize that why we are suffering from this incapacity. To give an example, often I tell people that, the two vitamins which people need most these days is vitamin F and vitamin L. So they ask, where will we get it? So you don't have to pay for it. You don't get it in pharmacy. So what is vitamin F? It is faith. So because there is such a left brain dominant looking at life, so we have suppressed faith. Faith is something bad. Faith is something like a belief system. We don't even know that there is a world of difference between faith and belief system. So faith is something not to be talked about. Faith is something very personal without even examining and understanding. And vitamin L, which is really deficient, is love. Why? Because, entire culture which is developing around the ego self and its gratification, authentic love is completely missing. The relations have become so much, based on give and take, what my interest, your interest. So love which is missing, of course, mothers do carry that, still that little hope that, they contain a little bit of that love. But the result is where there is no love. What does love bring? Love brings joy and beatitude. So the degree of depression that is number of cases because there is lack of love. And imagine the kind of therapies which are coming into existence. $200 you pay and you hug a cow. Get a pet home. Well, yes, it works. Simply because for a change you learn to give love. It opens a door inside or receive some love, because animals are those who they are giving us the lesson of love because they love unconditionally. So this is something so beautiful. So because of all these contradictions within us, we have developed along a line where we are top heavy, very intelligent in terms of head, and lot of vital passion, ambition. This is precisely the combination that we put children into. That you must be intelligent, you must be able to perform very well, and passion to achieve. So what happens? The heart is stunted. Love is of no utility really. So the result is an entirely Asuric civilization. Asura by definition is a being who is extremely intelligent but with a hollow in the heart and extremely ambitious. So what is the result? Not only an individual is suffering, but a whole generation and society, and its long-term repercussions we know, and I need not go into that entire dark side. This needs to be corrected. And that corrective is yoga. What does it teach? First, that ego is not the center. Excuse me. Neither my ego, nor collective ego, nor the group ego, none of this is the center. What does it teach? The center is that ineffable reality, that source, the creator, God, call him by anything. That divine, the mother, the creatrix, that is the center. Find that. So beautifully, Yam Nachiketa Samvad, where, Nachiketa says, I want to know the secret of immortality. And death tells him, why do you want to know? Even gods don't know it. I'll give you a lot of horses and cows and cattle and women and kingdom and money, wealth. Why don't you take all this? And Nachiketa asks a very pertinent question. Such a simple, common sense we have lost, He asked that, will you one day take them away? Only a child has the courage to ask such a question. Well, my boy, I will. I give them, I'll take them. They are subject. Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, all that we have, the gifts of time, cannot satisfy the spirit's sacred thirst. They cannot, because it'll come and one day it'll be taken away. It's not that don't have them, but don't believe that they are of ultimate value. They are there. If they come, use them rightly, divinely. But don't get that this is what I am seeking. Don't start seeking them. So Yama says that, well, you can choose it. He says, no, I don't want this. I want that which is eternal and lasting. This is a small little exercise, very sobering. So when people are, going through this loss and, sometimes a financial loss, sometimes it's various kinds of loss, even personal loss of, people, for instance, who have gone away. So I ask them that, are you grieving for the person or for yourself? If you're grieving for the person, know that the person is moving towards freedom and for a new becoming. And if you're grieving for yourself, then see what was wrong with the relationship, what was it that I was getting from him? That value, the true value, is not in the form, it's something else. And maybe you can look for it in the higher sense, in the truest sense, in that from where you can never lose it. So human love to divine love, that's what I am suggesting. So when we look at life like that, the first thing it teaches us that the objects, the things, it's myself, my family, God is not at their service. If he seems to concede, it's because he is benevolent and compassionate. But a time comes when we start taking it for granted and we think, okay, anyways, it's his job description. And the time has come for us to evolve. So he gives us a lot of opportunity to evolve when things are very nice, but we don't. So sometimes the same God who plays Masuri, Janamastami tomorrow, so generally we celebrate the Vrindavan aspect of Shri Krishna. We have nice jhaki and all that, and baby Krishna, no? Because he is born. Don't forget, Krishna is revolution. The moment he put his foot on the soil, the kingdom of Kansa had started crumbling. Prisons' doors were opened. What prisons are they? They are not just prisons of outer life. They are inner prisons of thought. Prisons is a vichardhara. Kansa represented a way of life, a way of thought. And all that starts breaking up. Yamuna heaves. Because now it's no more going to be, Krishna is revolution. And yet we are very comfortable with Krishna of Vrindavan, Bake Bihari, Govardhan, Govind. Of course, you should be able to find out why there are so few temples of Sri Krishna as Chakrapani. Krishna is not just, Murli Manohar, Shyama Sundar. He is also Chakrapani, he is also Krishna of the Gita, who declares on the battlefield, Kalosmi Bhava, Lokashakrat Pravadha. I am the Lord, but I am manifesting as death. Death? What have you come to? To slay all these creatures. Oh, opposite side. No, even this side. Whatever is based on ego, whatever is based on evil is going to be destroyed. So what will survive at the end? Only that which can stand pure on the truth of its purpose, the hour of God. Sri Aurobindo says that. So basically, when we start looking at life afresh, that's not meant only for my enjoyment and pleasure, then the entire thing changes. There are philosophies, even religions, which declare so foolishly that God made the lower animals just so that we can eat them. I've never heard something as absurd as that, as if he was preparing this earth so that man can come and devour it. That's an entirely asuric way of looking at life. Whereas the true way of looking at life is that he is doing it for the delight of existence. Take delight in everything. It's not desire but delight which is behind creation. It's so beautiful to hug a cow and to, feel her as your mother and take delight in the cow. And so silly and brute and barbaric to kill to eat it. But that's how we are. Because the whole civilization has proceeded along those lines. So we have to set the balance right, dethrone the ego and install God. So ego is the one which brings in all kinds of viruses. The virus of dissatisfaction, the virus of frustration, the virus of unhappiness, misery. Mother gave a very interesting solution when people would say, Mother, I'm unhappy, I'm unhappy. Mother says, if you think about yourself, life will be unhappy. The least we could do is, instead of thinking about ourselves, think of there's so many other things in this world. But again, when we don't think about ourselves, we are still that ideological groove in which we are going. Let's think about something still vaster. It's one of the solutions to step back, as I said, and look at life and its images going through centuries and millenniums. Look at the centuries that pass. What survives, from the time of the Mahabharata. Look at how for 2500 years such lineage of kings. And then look at how the Greeks, the Huns, the Portuguese, the Mughals, and finally the British, French, all these people invaded India. They have come and gone. What has survived is the Gita. This is called Satyamev Jayate. It's not just about outward events. Eventually. So to hold on to that which is eternal, not these things of relative value. They have a value, but a relative value. They can be used beautifully. A computer can be used very beautifully. It can be used most maliciously. We all know that. So the first thing is that life should be at the service of something greater, higher, if not the divine. Fortunate who can put it at the service of the divine, but at least within us the urge for progress, conscious aspiration. So dethrone the ego. Ego is limiting us into a little hole. It tends to put us into a hole of misery, and there we are lamenting. Sometimes even when there is no reason to lament, we are lamenting, as the mother said about this man who was punishing himself that I am guilty and I should be in hell. He had died, and she could see that he is suffering in a hell of his own making. And she said, there is no hell out here. So he said, no, I am a guilty person. I have committed sin and therefore I must suffer. It took her quite an effort and the yogic knowledge to, destroy that illusion. So these are the illusions in which the ego traps us. So first thing is dethrone the ego and bring in God, the soul. And where is it located? Precisely the point which we have missed. It's in the heart. We have missed the heart, forgotten it. The mind we remember, left brain. And whatever quarrel is there between the left and the right. As somebody said that there are two sides of the brain. The left has nothing right in it and the right has nothing left in it. Well, that has happened because who will harmonize the left and the right? It is the heart within us. So this heart which we have missed out, in the depths of the heart, the divine presence resides. That's why in India we say Namaste, joining our hands at the heart. We don't do this awkward gesture and say Namaste. And instinctively, me. We don't touch the head and say me. We don't touch the belly and say me. We touch it here. This is where Nachiketa is told by Yama, here is Aditi. This is what thou seekest. First thing, to seek the divine, to seek the perfection, which you don't find in life. To seek the permanent and not the temporary and the transient. They are there. But first let us find the bedrock, the solid rock on which we can stand, and that image of Kanyakumari Swami Vivekananda comes into my eye. It is not just an image. It's a powerful symbol of standing on a rock. Look at the monk meditating with the sea all around splashing. This is the image of a yogin who is firm within his soul, rooted as a rock upon a rock, while the world forces are passing by. You see, look at Sri Aurobindo when all this was the harbinger of the change. But where did the power come from? When the entire world is plunged into that First World War and all this is going on. What was Sri Aurobindo doing? Through the Arya, bringing new light into the world. But the ego can see only its little interest, it cannot look beyond. It cannot free its gaze to reach wisdom's sun. So, to dethrone the ego and install God. And how to do it? Through concentration, through making Him the center of our life, serving Him in whatever way, through humility, that He is the one source. This world is meant for Him. He is the creator. I am meant for Him. Through constant remembrance. How do we bring peace into this desired self, ever restless? The Gita gives us such a wonderful, simple ways. One of the most simplest of ways. Nishkam karma. We have this ignorant idea that without desire we won't move. Try doing it. The same work, one will do much, much, much better. When we are worried about performance and results, unfortunately, half our energy is sapped out on something which we really cannot control. We still can perform if we have an eye on excellence and perfection rather than ambition and desire. Besides, it tends to give a twist to our thinking. So a man who is living for that, invariably, if there is a conflict of interest between his desire and ambition, vis-a-vis the work and its total performance, he will give preference to this. There is a kink. Right at the beginning, the mother speaks of ambition as the canker in the fruit. So why should we work? Why? For the joy of work. An archer does not shoot because he is going to get a medal. He shoots for the joy of it. You know that recently that movie has come, Seth Shah and Vikram Batra. So, he was that warrior who died in the Kargil war. Young man, what a hero. And he demolishes camps of the, Pakistani camps and So much so that they are all the time targeting this one man like Abhimanyu. And eventually, his motto used to be, "Ye dil mange more." I am not happy with these small victories. I want more and more. He died, but he died like a hero. That's called death. In fact, it's not called death. It is immortality, like Abhimanyu. So this is the kind of life, and why this is missing, because we don't even teach that our children the joy of sacrifice, doing work for the joy of it. Not because, right from childhood the king goes in. When people come to home, बेटा जरा सुनाना वो बाबा ब्लैक शिप, तो बच्चा सुनाता है, अभी चेंज हो गया होगा, आई एम सॉरी, एंड एवरीबडी क्लैप, वाओ ही नोज such good English, very good. Hari, it's not a good rhyme, by the way. It's. But that apart, the point is that the joy of singing, it's not because you want to become a singer, it's not because you want to perform, it's not because you want to get appreciation, but you are enjoying it. And that's one of the best singing that comes out when you are doing it for the joy of it. It's true of all activities, speaking, listening. If somebody is listening because, you have to listen, otherwise, you'll be marked absent. That's not a thing. Or because you have signed up, but the joy of listening. So this joy in things takes a back seat when desire comes to the forefront. So there is a delight in works. And if we do works for the sake of the joy that is inherent in it, and there's so many joys, leave aside yoga, even otherwise we do, which are done not for desire. When a person is busy discovering something new, there's such a joy because he wants to discover. When you read Sri Aurobindo's books, you want to know something which is beautiful. It's not because it gives you desire, satisfaction. Sri Aurobindo doesn't give us 7 easy steps to success in family and outside life. In fact, if you asked him, he would say, well, I refuse to be domesticated. I'm a very poor father. Abba, he raised his hands. But we read it because there is a joy in that. There are so many activities that we can do. So later on people say we can't read Sri Aurobindo because we have never been taught to do things for the joy of it. Always the thing should have a result. So when we read Sri Aurobindo, I must understand. Now that's not the thing. Just read. It doesn't matter even if one doesn't understand. There is a great joy just reading for the sake of it. Writing for the sake of joy. So joy must come in, and when we start doing Nishkam Karma, then this new well opens up. No more for the sake of satisfaction of desire and a result. So Nishkam literally means that. So all the time we do some activity either because somebody has to be satisfied. Worse comes that, I am trying to make everybody happy. I see this very commonly. Not things have changed, but old time, daughter-in-laws. I have tried, my mother-in-law, father-in-laws are good, generally, for daughter-in-laws. Well, I try to make her happy, I try to make my husband happy, children happy, but I am so unhappy. Is there a way that I can do something about them? I said, no. It's getting it all wrong. You'll just end up becoming a martyr. That's not what life is about. Getting rid of the ego does not mean that I lay myself at the altar of another gigantic ego. The ego has only one place where it should be removed, and that is at the feet of the divine. As Mother put it so beautifully, do not live to please yourself. Do not live to please others. So very often when we see, oh, my ego, I should work upon the ego. So we start pleasing people. Do not live to please yourself. Do not live to please others. So what should we live for, Mother? Live to please the divine. And such a joy. If nothing else, live for a higher ideal. If divine sounds too far and high, live for bringing something beautiful into the world. Live for the day that when you leave, people genuinely feel, as we are speaking of Dr. Jagdish Vyas memorial lecture, so beautiful that people genuinely remember him for something authentic that he gave. If I am not mistaken, many portions of Savitri he has translated. You can clarify that, Vivek. I found it very, it's something beautiful. It's like something which has been given to earth, not just devoured and went away. So this, when we live for something larger, vaster, to create beauty upon earth, to create perfection, to give a little joy, very beautifully conjured in one of the Hindi songs, किसी की मुस्कुराहटों पर हो निसार, किसी का दर्द तेरे दिल में ले उतार, जीना इसी का नाम है. किसी के वास्ते हो तेरे दिल में प्यार, जीना इसी का नाम है. It's at a human level. But we can take it to a divine height, sublime heights. So this is the way Nishkam Karma, constant remembrance of the divine, is the best purifier. What is the one practice people can do when they ask the mother? She said, it's an attitude, no, mother, give us a practice. One method. She says, you want our method? Yes, mother. Our method, which is the method. She says, well, japa. Call the divine name. It is something so powerful. It really purifies the whole being. So from the yogic perspective, this will still this desire, restlessness, it will bring peace into the system automatically. It's no point just uttering Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti and living by the desired self. Because then Shanti also becomes an object. So people in sadhana also start, assessing their progress. How much I have progressed? Let me see. If they don't, they become very restless because still they are pursuing it with desire. And the third is healing the contradictions of life. Healing the contradictions of life can only take place not by suppressing one and other. Bring in the true master. Take everything to its ultimate point, and we'll see there was never any antagonism. Take reason to its ultimate. It will show us the divine reason which works in this creation. There is a reason why things happen the way they happen, but it's not a human reason, it's a divine reason. What is divine reason? That is supermind. We don't want to use very abstract terms. What is supermind? It's the divine reason. The logic of the infinite, which is operating in this entire creation. We don't know it. Why? Because we are caught in a network of forces where we cannot see the play, because there we see only things from me and my centric point of view. So this last aspect which is important, one is this contradiction. To heal them, take love to its utmost. If you take love only, oh, love is very bad. Why? Because it makes us unhappy. Nobody returns me what I have loved all my life, everybody. But at the end, I have to end up with Mukesh's sad songs. Well, you never loved. Love has nothing to do about it. Love is a flaming angel. When we have loved once, we will know that love is something so beautiful. Even if there is no return, love still gives joy. That is the beauty of love. By its nature, if Ananda is the fruit, love is the flower. That beautiful pomegranate tree, mother has given a name to the fruit, which is different. People think that is the same. But to the flower, she has used the word divine love. So it is two ways of looking at it. Where there is love, there is Ananda. They are interconnected. So depression, perfect remedy. Love someone, love a plant, speak to a tree, love your child, love your wife, husband, love someone in this world. If one cannot love God, and see the springs of joy will open. And if we take love to the limit, it becomes one with reason. Divine in all his actions, even what seems to us very cruel, still he loves. When he loves, he strikes. That is also his love. Very beautifully, as Sri Aurobindo puts it, if thou lovest me, then strike me. If thou strikest me not, I know that thou lovest me not. Ask Sri Krishna, why are you destroying? You are being very cruel. He will say, no, I love them. Really, you love them? You do this out of love? Yes. Why are you doing this? I am breaking the forms and liberating the spirit which was feeling so stifled inside. That is love. Love is, even Kali loves, intense love. So when we take love to its ultimate, take joy to its absolute. What is it? Ananda, which is there in everything. Take everything to its absolute. But how are we to do it? Because we'll take love to its absolute. Lifetime is not enough. Body to its ultimate capacities. 5 lifetimes is not enough. Every aspect to its absolute. How can we do it? Simple way is love the absolute. So when we love God as Ananta Guna, not as, he is impersonal, infinite, well, that is okay. That's if you want liberation. But it doesn't solve the problem of life. But love the divine as Ananta Guna Purushottama of the Gita. He is one and he is infinite, endowed with infinite qualities. And then we will see that each thing rises to its peak. Love God and love arrives at its fullness and beatitude. Turn the mind towards God and our human mind is illumined with the divine reason. Turn our speech and words in the service of the divine. And the speech, my words are drunk with the immortal swine. There'll be a flow of the nectar of immortality of the gods. Turn life into an adoration and worship of the eternal, and life will mirror the sacred strength, the power, the luminous force that is inbuilt within it. Turn the body itself and every act of the body into a ritual worship. And we don't need to go to the temple, because this is the temple. So it is this approach that one can take if one wants to take, and arrive at the fullness and the perfection which we are not yet. And because we are not yet that, therefore we are living in perpetual unease. This is the cause of his high unease. In one of his poems, Sri Aurobindo says so beautifully, there is a need within the soul of man. The splendors of the surface never sate, for life and mind and their glory and debate are a slow prelude to a vaster theme, a preface to the epic supreme. We have just read the preface of life. We have just read the acknowledgement section. We have not even entered into the real life. And the real life begins when we seek the real, the unique, the ultimate, the one, and not the many. Then real life begins. Very often people say, oh, yoga means turning away from life. So I tell them, when they tell me, I say, no, it is getting into the real life. And sometimes I have to tell people, get real. To use a phrase today, get real. Right now we are playing with illusions. How can they make us happy? Well, if we think we can't do that, then let us be satisfied as Adhe Adhure Insan. And the paradox is, Adha Adhura, half, can never be satisfied. It seeks wholeness and fullness. And no psychiatrist, no psychologist can give it to you. Ask him. I am a psychiatrist, I can say that, with impunity. Ask a psychiatrist, have you found that ultimate peace? No, I am very unhappy at home. Or I am unhappy with this. Some problem or issue is there. Unless he becomes a yogi. Fortunately, we don't have to do a qualifier course to enter into yoga. We don't have to do a $1,000 course, though there are plenty of that which goes around. All that is needed is a sincere aspiration in the heart and living faith that what I seek is there. If it was not there, I would not have sought it. And we can go still further. Because I seek it, it has already been granted to me. My seeking, my aspiration is a sign that the fulfillment, the seal and signature has already been put on the fulfillment. It has to just be realized in everyday life. Time limits, Vivek, thank you so much. But if there is any question, I'll be very happy to take.
Thank you, Alokji. If anyone has any question, while people are thinking about question about Papaji, that Savitri, he had written 3 volume, which is his own study. That's what it called.
Yes. I think that is very important, because something so beautiful. It's a gift to the world. I've seen that copy. That's why I remembered.
One thing I just want to, on that note, because we have seen him working on it, and the point what you are making about the joy. So those 3 volumes, he has written by hand at least 4 times before he gave it to press.
Yes.
So it cannot be done unless you enjoy the work what you are doing. There is no way it's possible that you write by hand all those pages 4 times before you think, oh, now it looks where I want it to be.
And on a similar note, I may add that while, there is a great joy when we are doing a work of that magnitude, the same joy, that's what the Samata, the Samam Brahman, is when Ba cooks a lovely meal for everybody for the joy of it.
Yes.
I have seen it. It's not because, somebody will praise or do something. So it is applicable in every activity from the so-called smallest to the so-called largest, because it is Samam Brahman.
Yes.
Alok Uncle, this is Aditi.
Yes, Aditi, yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in moments like these, in this talk, it makes someone feel very peaceful to remember that there is a contradiction in everyone, and that to get out of this contradiction, we have to work to just, love and focus on the divine. And in this moment, it will bring peace upon whoever is listening. In moments that, we're not speaking to you, we're listening to your talk, how do you remember to constantly,
Yeah.
just remember the love for the
Yeah.
divine,
So
or just
how to
constantly.
extend this consciousness into our everyday life, right? Something
Yes.
like that. So
Yeah.
there is a very beautiful saying of Swami Vivekananda. He says, first read. So this is the first read and listen. In fact, he gave a more importance to listening. So first read and listen. I would say reading is because for the first time we have directly the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, because in Swami Vivekananda we don't have that kind of wealth of literature. So listen, read, doesn't matter. So read and listen. Then he says, think and meditate. So next step is, it's not enough just to read and listen. Next step is meditate upon them. Spend some time, set it apart a time, not a big time. Pick up a passage from Savitri. How I used to do is, before I would start my work every day, I would write a little passage from prayers and meditation in my office, and write a little passage from Savitri, something which I loved. So it was for the joy of it. It doesn't take much time, 10-15 minutes, stay quiet, put some nice Sunil Das music, and then you go out for work. So then reflect. So through the day, that line goes on, somewhere or the other, a passage you have written. For instance, a prayer, a master act, a king idea can link man's strength to it, to the transcendence force. Then miracle is made the common rule. Now, it's a passage very powerful, 3 lines, or all can be done if the God touch is there. I tell you, these lines can be so powerfully, they can enter our inner being. I remember when I was operated upon for something, and the doctors woke me out of anesthesia, and there were people, do you recognize? I was seeing mother's images everywhere. And the first thing that I told them was, all can be done if the God touch is there. So obviously the surgeon didn't understand. So he asked the people, what is he saying? They said, he's okay. It's making perfect sense. And then I again lapsed into that part. I remember going back into that state of unconsciousness, saying, Savitri, 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 remembering that how Satyavan had gone into the lap of Savitri, 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 and there was such a joy. So, meditate, reflect upon these lines. These were lines which I had really reflected upon, and there's such a joy. Every time in distress, difficulty, all can be done if the God touch is there. So then think and meditate. So read and listen, think and meditate. Then, out of these, pick up one idea. Don't get confused here, there, everywhere. Pick up one idea. For me, that one idea is mother, Ma. But there are people who would say, knowledge, different people have different ideas. They have a right to their own ideas. For me, it is Ma, and always to aspire that may I love you and serve you till my last breath of every life. So pick up that one idea. Don't be distracted into, okay, let me try this, try that. And then let that idea enter into your nerve, your veins, live that idea, which means sincerity. At the end of the day, we find that for which we are sincerely seeking. Otherwise, life will remain torn. It's a tragedy, when we just read, and as you have rightly said, when we have not lived it, it's a bigger problem sometimes. So it's very nice, at least all of you children who are exposed at such a young age, born in a family where you have such a good sanskaras and, exposure already given to you. So don't leave it only at reading and listening. That's where your sincerity will count. That's your practice. Spend a time reading a little bit of, let's say, Savitri and a prayer every day. Spend a little time writing a little prayer to the mother. Write anything. Mother, I am unhappy. That's it. Mother, gratitude to you. Ma, this happened and, I am so happy about it. Share with her everything. And everything you can write. Ma, I feel love for this boy. Ma, I am going through a heartbreak. She is the mother. Now, what happens when we do that? First, there is a contact with the divine. We think that the divine is not hurt. No, she wants us to make the contact from our side. Then what happens? She starts pouring herself into that movement, that activity, its roots, that tendency, and slowly a strange alchemy begins to take place within our nature. Because everything that we are experiencing is because of a certain tendency in nature. And when we connect it to the divine by offering. So remember and offer all the activities. It could be taking a bath. It could be, it will be all these activities. Going to the washroom. Offer it to the mother. Many times we'll forget, but many times we'll remember. But a time will come, this will become a constant state. So this is the way where the gap always lies between what we know and what we practice. And that gap has to be filled with sincerity. That sincerity comes when we are clear about the goal. So all these things apart, be clear about the goal of life. If the goal of life is, gratification of desire or some kind of ambition, then it will remain bit here and bit there. We can't help it. But one day, still we must move. One day, things will happen. This life, another life, as Tulsidas has put it so beautifully, ek ghadi ya do ghadi, adho mein punyad, tulsi sangati sadhu ki hare koti aprad. So even a moment of reflection, slowly a time will come when he whom you are seeking to connect with all your 100 goals will become the goal. So that takes time. That depends on, lives behind us and lives in front of us. So put in whatever practice you can, till one day the divine becomes the very goal, the reason of our existence. Where we are able to say that even if everything is taken away from me, the last shred of dress which hides my utter shame and nudity, my sense of being an empress, even that is taken away. Still, oh Krishna, may I remember you, may I remember you. That's Draupadi. So that should be our state. And it takes time to reach that climax. But it comes. It has come in the life of many and it will come. Okay, Aditi? Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alok. This is Dolores. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Hi, and reflection as well. Everything you just said, I also found as I ask Mother to help on daily basis. And June, I think, 11th of 2012, when she was creating an amazing groups, she mentioned about how we can be more diligent about our thoughts. And she actually had 5 conditions, and everything that you just mentioned were there. It's unbelievable. I just want to thank you and your team for all the daily posts. But as we all having this pressure from the mother to perform better and achieve this amazing goal of transformation and perfection, and because we're all there in this privileged, amazing journey. Listening your talks, I came to this a little bit confusion, how to differentiate between renunciation and rejection.
Okay, that's wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. So how to differentiate between renunciation and rejection? So first of all, renunciation as it is understood today is the renunciation which is outward. So let's say that one renounces the home, one walks away, doesn't own a home, one renounces wealth, so there is no bank balance. This is how it has been traditionally understood. And there is a very beautiful chapter on renunciation where Sri Aurobindo clarifies it very beautifully in the Synthesis of Yoga. He says concentration is the left arm of yoga, renunciation is the right arm. So what really is renunciation is not a renunciation of object, but renunciation of the way we deal with it. We have wealth, but we are, renouncing it. Renouncing normally means that I throw away this wealth or give it away to somebody. But rejection means I reject all the egoistic attachment, the greed, all the kinds of other things which are associated, the lusts which people use wealth to satisfy or money to make money. So I am rejecting those tendencies. Basically, I am rejecting the entire network of lower nature which has usurped everything and uses it for the expansion of the empire of the lower. This in context of what you beautifully mentioned about the higher consciousness. And placing the same things in the hands of the divine to use them. Let's take an example of, let us say, a relationship. So wealth and all is easy to understand. What does one do in case of relationship? So one is that renounce means, okay, I will leave and now I'll walk away. No, we reject all kinds of expectation, desires, ambitions that have gone into it, lust, and we learn to love for the sake of it. When mother was asked about it, it's beautifully, she explained, this is in volume 8 of collected works of the mother, 308 or 301. Later on you could read the whole passage, where she was asked that we are asked to reject all human love for the sake of the divine. So what do we do if human love comes in a way? She says, go through it. It's a beautiful preparation. And then she says, many people in trying to reject human love, they end up rejecting the very possibility of love. And sometimes it takes centuries to recover it. So she gives us the solution, learn to love without expectation. Now it's difficult because human nature is, not geared like that. There's always some expectation of the other. Learn to love unselfishly. That's how she says, uncalculatingly. Well, world may say that, you'll be deceived and all that. Yes, of course. There will be, all these things will happen. But eventually we will start at some point going past the form and touching the principle of divine love. And then that love will begin to manifest and express in our life and, actions. So this is to take two examples, one of a material object at one end and second of, human relationship at the highest, the most difficult part because of the inherent complexity of human beings. Then in much later in volume 10, she also describes very beautifully. She says, don't suppress things, don't reject, because when you have this idea of good and bad, she explains very beautifully, it prevents offering. Why? Because automatically bad, we put it behind. And good, we put up a very nice picture. She says, no, don't have that. So what should we have, mother? She says, it doesn't mean you indulge into it, but see things as they are and offer them to the light. In fact, she has used very strong words there. She says, do not try to be among the holies. So she says that accept your own burden of the anti-divine, which is what is meant, the deeper sense of the biblical symbol that, bear your own cross and bear your own burden. So all of us have the shadow within us, which has to be offered, seen, acknowledged and offered. And sometimes in the process we may indulge because, it's more difficult to do this way than to just shove it inside and put it under, sit over it. But here it will come out and we have to keep offering with an aspiration. That may, whatever it is within me, may it turn into what its original sense is. Because even the lowest, as he says in Savitri, our lowest parts have room for highest needs. Our deepest needs have room for, highest possibilities. So even the very lowest things, aspects, even merely eating, sleeping, things which are directly connected to the bodily self, even they have a possibility of something higher. So we have to keep offering them with a will for beauty, for purity in the higher sense, not in the moral sense, for divinization and for the divine to use them. It's a long process but more complete, and eventually that brings perfection. Renunciation, as we understand today, is very easy. Leave something, but the tendency remains, the roots remain. And that's why in olden times there was the idea of monastic order. Wear one kind of clothes, don't meet with people, or shun this kind of people because you will get contaminated. And it used to happen. When sannyasis came out into the world, they couldn't handle it. So here, while we are in the world, while things are with us, we keep offering them with a will for their becoming more better, more beautiful, more in accordance with the law of truth. That is what we have to practice. Yes.
Thank you, Alok ji, again.
Thank you.